So basically, this is about the impact of colonialism on Africa today. So why did Africa develop itself in a way that it has developed? So basically, looking at the recent history to see, okay, why to understand Africa a little bit better. So this is about colonialism. It's about 4 or 5 minutes, and it discusses, okay, the reason why Africa is what it is today. So first thing that was important to realize that actually Africa was 6,000 different countries, not really countries, but different tribes who basically lived as tribes. So that were their countries, and that it was later on divided in 54 countries by Western colonial powers.
Look at one, and I tread carefully here, is the destruction of belief in Africa. The
colonial era was long enough to destroy leadership within Africa, because they were basically Western powers took over leadership and started to control it, not delegating much responsibility to other leaders, but really taking control, and thereby destroying the leadership structure. But it was also too short to have it replaced by something else, so they didn't regain autonomy even under colonial rule. So therefore, once the Western nations disappeared, basically it left Africa with leadership class ruined and no structure to build upon. So actually, after the Europeans left, there was no. They had to reinvent their own leadership, and that led to a low self confidence.
So they don't believe white people.
They do.
White people.
They do believe white people. They don't believe themselves. They don't. They have more. What he's saying is that actually, I do trust you because you're white. But what do you mean because I'm white? Why don't you trust your own people? No, I wouldn't believe it. If
they don't believe the local people.
Right.
Why?
Well, if we look at how well Africa has developed itself after colonialization, we shouldn't forget it's like 60 years ago then most countries started to become independent, and not very successfully so, failed a lot. And why did they fail? Also because of lack of self-confidence, because there was no structure to build upon, as they did not inherit anything from the colonial period. So there was no stepping stone on which they could on which they could continue. Basically, they had to start from scratch.
Confidence, and it's
Chinua Achebe is like the contemporary Shakespeare of African literature. A Nigerian writer who wrote very beautiful books on African culture and on Nigerian culture in specific.
What he said.
So what he says is that actually you can find the future of Africa lies in its history, the historical, the traditions of Africa. So the whole colonial era that had disappeared. Now we're trying to reinvent ourselves and building up democratic structures, but not very successfully. So what you need to do is you need to go back. Africa needs to go back to its traditional structures, its traditional democratic structures, in order to become successful. So not copying the West, but actually building on their own traditions.
What does this mean?
This means that actually, so in the tribal system, you had the kings, right? The kings, and I will show a video about that later. But the kings,
kind of tyrant.
Well, not a tyrant actually. A king has a responsibility. It's like the president. And then you have a parliament, and there are representatives of different groups within your society, and they form a kind of a parliament. This kind of system is much closer to African culture and traditions, and has much more chance of succeeding,
Like Malaysia.
like Malaysia. Right. They also have
Many
it.
local
They have
kings,
it. They
many
have
local kings.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And he calls up the trader on the other.
He said, let's see.
Yeah. So so basically the cattle, what that is raised in Somalia, they're trying to sell overseas across the Red Seas into the Middle East. So he wants to sell that cattle for meat for a price, but he doesn't know that. He didn't know that. Basically, he would just come down when the weather allowed him, when the season changed, and when his cattle was ready to be slaughtered, butchered. But nowadays, with the internet and the mobile phone technology, they can simply make a call and figure out, okay, so what are the prices at the moment? Are the prices going up or going down? Should I come down right now, or should I wait a little bit more until the prices are better?
He said, Red Sea. What do you mean?
The Red Sea is actually from Somalia. If you get across into the Red Sea, you go into Yemen and Saudi Arabia.
So,
So this cattle, this sheep herder, as you will, from Somalia, now is enabled. So what he's talking about is the impact of technology. What changes Africa is China and technology, mobile phone technology. And it doesn't sound like much, but it has a huge impact. And an example is that even a sheep herder from Somalia, by using a mobile phone, is now enabled and can now see what the market is doing. And they didn't have that option before. That transparency was not there. So basically, they were kind of powerless, where the traders would have this information and they could actually find, okay, where can I get the lowest price? And the sellers were not, they didn't have that technology. So it could be that people were selling their products for a way too low price because the market price was much higher. But what do you know if you sell your goods in city A and then 5 kilometers down the road, people are selling their products, the same products at a much higher price? You don't know. But now, because of mobile phones, etc., people know. So we see a much better market economy.
He get know the information crossing Red Sea.
Yeah.
What he said?
Yeah. So basically, he can now know that, okay, now is a good time. Now the prices are good. So now I'm going to bring my cattle down. I'm going to ship everything to Saudi Arabia.
Oh, I mean.
Decide what's the price, because I need to know what's the best time to come out of the mountains. All sorts of things.
So he is very hot news. And Nigeria people, he said, middle class people coming from overseas.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, actually, there even here in Tokyo, there's a quite large group of Nigerian professionals who work for the embassy and trade.
Really?
Yeah. Or maybe it's just coincidence, but I happen to know quite a few people with Nigerian roots, or people who work for Nigerian embassy, etc. For Nigerians. There are quite a few.
I never worked. I have no friend of Nigerian people, but
I do.
this is very interesting. So, there you go. You guys can't hear. It's very interesting. Okay, next.
So basically, in this video, the things that, looking back, colonialism destroyed a lot. It destroyed their ruling infrastructure, because they took over anything and it didn't delegate any responsibilities. So there were these tribes that were self-ruling, but that was replaced with countries, and at the head of the countries were put the Western leaders, and they didn't delegate their power. So that basically destroyed the ruling class. That was long enough to destroy it, but not long enough to actually to have it replaced, to have some local autonomy. So when African nations became independent just after World War II, you saw that they basically had to reinvent themselves, and they tried to follow Western models of democracy, or follow the communist countries, but it was not indigenous to Africa. It was not based on their culture. So Chinua Achebe, he advocated that Africans need to go back to their roots, the way that they were ruling themselves in pre-colonial era. Then looking at the future, the things that is changing Africa at the moment are China, are technology, mobile phone technology in specific, and are the expats when they are returning back to Africa, because they have new standards, different requirements, and the way that they are, for example, educating their children. And so they want to raise them against the same standards as they have seen in the countries where they stayed for a period of time. So that will have impact on Africa's future. These are mostly affluent people, and they will be shaping the middle class in the near future.
Not only Nigeria.
Not only Nigeria. Also, well, the main economic centers in Africa, as we learned last week, are the area in Nigeria and around Nigeria, in Kenya and around Kenya, and in South Africa and around South Africa. Those are the main areas. If we look at in the longer run, then we will see that it probably concentrates around Nigeria and Kenya, and in the south will have less impact.
It means recently they are much more considered for the manufacturing opportunity or service industry. Are they?
Yes, in Africa, well, not so much, actually.
So it
Not
is,
so much.
as you said, middle class came from overseas. What they're doing actually?
Oh, well, I mean, so they are, of course, like, what are they? What is Africa exporting? Natural resources.
Exporting natural resources.
Yeah, mostly natural resources.
Mm.
Raw material business.
But not so many people.
Not so many people. But given that the African economies on average are growing like 5-6%, much faster than the rest of the world, okay, accepting the fact that they come from a very low base point, but still they're growing, and the demographics look very promising, especially when you put it against, for example, China. Then a lot of people in countries like Japan are interested in investing in Africa, because it looks very promising. You mentioned that there was a big investment event in Tokyo. That's not a coincidence. I think that's the third one in 3 years' time. They had 2 in Yokohama, and this year in Tokyo, apparently. So it looks like it's gaining importance. For me, the fact that it's now held in Tokyo is a sign on the wall that Africa is becoming more and more important, and that also people in Japan are starting to get a little bit worried, because you only hear about China when you talk about Africa, and maybe we are also a little bit afraid that we are a little bit too late into the game.
How do you think Japan decided to make investment 300 million yen, right? Or 30 billion yen investment, right? Africa.
Right. Well, I think it's going to be a very valuable learning experience, I believe.
It means useless.
Well, Useless, I don't know. Done right. I met with my former customer when I was working in the JICA project.
JICA.
Yeah, and I walked into him last weekend, and I asked him how he was doing, and he actually explained a little bit about his business, and he sees that things are changing in his business. So where he was exclusively dependent.
He's in Africa?
No, well, also in Africa, by the way. Not only in Africa, but also in Africa. But the way that JICA is now operating is much less exclusive, and they're not putting all their eggs in one basket anymore. They're becoming a little bit more smart. They're becoming a little bit more aware of the flaws in the way that they are doing their projects. So that gives me good hope that actually suppliers from Japan, companies from Japan, need to be more agile, need to be more tailored toward actually solving solutions in Africa. So that actually is I think that could be the starting point of creating better relationships, developing better relationships overseas.
They gradually know how to do
They
business.
gradually start to understand how to do business and what was wrong with their way of doing business. So that gave me a little hope that things are actually moving in the right direction.
It means very far behind from us, right? But now it's getting a little bit closer.
Yeah.
But China involved a lot. They are very smart.
But the Chinese approach is a little bit different from the Japanese approach. Okay, so first of all, China is a country. They have their own, more or less, non-convertible currency. So, but what their business model, I believe, is more gaining influence, and they can just use their printing press and just throw money at Africa, make sure that their creditors will default on their loans, and then taking possession of the crown jewels of those countries. It's a different philosophy. I don't think that Japan will be engaging in business in that way. So that's a little bit comparing. I wouldn't say that China is doing it better. They just have a different objective.
Their culture is they know how to get money.
Right.
Japanese are no, they are not. They are kind of sort of people is making product oriented,
Right.
or they don't so much smart for service industry. So they can do in Africa not so well, right?
They're not smart for service industry. I think actually Japan is excellent at providing services, but making profit from providing services, that's a different story.
Okay,
Okay.
go ahead.
Did you get sleepy, Uno-san?
No, not so much.
No, it's
Little bit.
結構寒い。
寒い. Yeah, I can sleep.
Okay, this is the business of development